The moment your paycheck hits your bank account, something ancient awakens inside you. It's not dramatic, not loud, not even something you can consciously pinpoint. It's more like a quiet shift in the internal climate of your mind, a gentle, warm front rolling through after a long, cold night. You don't notice the temperature change at first, but your shoulders relax, your breath deepens, and the buzzing tension behind your thoughts fades just slightly. Most people never stop to analyze this moment, even though it repeats itself every month of their lives. But I've spent years paying attention to it, obsessively, almost scientifically, because that moment used to control me in ways I didn't understand. My name is Phil, and if I could travel back in time and sit across from my younger self on one of those chaotic paydays, I'd grab him by the shoulders and say, "This moment is shaping your entire future. You just don't know it yet." For so long, payday felt like a rescue, like the universe finally throwing me a rope after letting me dangle all month. The relief was addictive, a rush that made the rest of life feel manageable again, and because relief feels good, I chased it. I treated payday like emotional oxygen, but relief is not a plan, and the greatest trap in financial life is mistaking relief for progress. When you've been living in stress for weeks, worrying about bills, juggling due dates, dodging overdraft fees, telling yourself everything will be fine. The moment you see those fresh digits in your account, your brain doesn't say, "Great, now we can plan responsibly." No, it says, "You're safe now, you survived, you can breathe." It's biology, not logic. That single instant of perceived safety triggers a cascade of chemicals that temporarily transform your thinking. Dopamine rises, cortisol drops, your fight or flight response dims, you experience a brief emotional expansion, you feel capable, hopeful, even a little invincible. And in that state, you make the worst financial decisions of your life. I know this because I did it for years. I repeated the same pattern month after month, convinced that the problem was my income, or my job, or bad luck, or the world being unfair. I never imagined the problem was inside me, inside my unexamined instincts, inside the emotional machinery of my brain, inside the habits I'd inherited from years of financial survival. Survival rewires you. It forces you to think short term. It convinces you that comfort must come before planning. It rewards reactive behavior and punishes intentionality. And the longer you live in survival mode, the more natural it feels. I grew up believing that people who struggled with money simply weren't disciplined. I believed the solution was tightening your belt, being tougher, trying harder. But when I finally took an honest look at my own life, I realized that discipline had nothing to do with it. I wasn't weak, I wasn't irresponsible, I wasn't broken, I was unaware. Aware of the numbers, sure. Aware of due dates, yes. Aware of the stress, absolutely. But unaware of the underlying forces, the psychology, the emotions, the impulses that governed every financial decision I made. One night, that unawareness caught up with me. It was 2:30 a.m. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, because I had checked my account earlier that evening and realized I had almost nothing left. Again. I had been paid only 10 days earlier. 10 days. I hadn't made any big purchases, I hadn't traveled, or splurged, or bought anything extravagant. So where had all the money gone? I opened my laptop and pulled up my transaction history. At first, I scanned quickly, expecting to find the obvious culprit: a forgotten bill, a subscription renewal, something large and easily blamed. But nothing stood out, just small purchases, lots of them. A coffee here, a takeout order there, a few online transactions, $20, $12, $7, $28, individually harmless, combined devastating. It was like discovering a leak, not a dramatic burst pipe, but hundreds of tiny, near invisible holes, letting the water of my life drain away without me noticing. And the worst part was that every one of those purchases had felt justified at the time, rational, necessary even. In the moment, they were little islands of relief in a stressful world. But together, they were the reason I was sinking. That night, staring at those numbers, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not shame, not anger, not despair, clarity. A kind of visceral, unmistakable clarity that cut through all my illusions. For the first time, I realized that the problem wasn't my income, it wasn't my expenses, it wasn't my circumstances, it was me. Not me as in I'm flawed, but me as in I've been operating blind. I'd been playing a game without understanding the rules. No wonder I kept losing. So I made myself a promise. I would understand myself. I would study my own behavior. I would dismantle every false belief I'd built about money. I would face every uncomfortable truth. And the first truth I faced was brutal. I had no idea what I actually needed to live. I thought I knew. Everyone thinks they know. But when I forced myself to categorize my expenses into two buckets, survival and comfort, I was shocked by how little genuinely fell into the survival category. Housing, food, utilities, transportation, healthcare, basic essentials. Everything else, comfort, convenience, emotion. And because I confused comfort with necessity, I treated emotional purchases like survival purchases. I told myself stories, really convincing ones, about why I needed certain conveniences, why I deserved certain treats, why certain habits were normal. It wasn't the spending that was the problem, it was the storytelling. Humans don't spend money logically, we spend money narratively. Every purchase is a story we tell ourselves. And I had been telling myself the wrong stories for far too long. Once I had stripped away my illusions, the next realization came naturally. The first job of every dollar is protection, not pleasure, not relief, not self expression, protection. The first thing I needed to protect was my financial reputation. I used to think credit scores were bureaucratic nonsense, numbers that didn't truly reflect anything meaningful. But after a few late payments, I realized the painful truth. Your credit score determines the cost of your future. It shapes your interest rates, your opportunities, your stress level, your negotiating power. A damaged financial reputation is the equivalent of trying to run a marathon with your shoelaces tied together. So I automated everything, not because I expected to forget a bill, but because I expected to be human. Humans forget, humans procrastinate, humans get overwhelmed. Systems do not. Automation became my first line of defense, my way of protecting future Phil from present Phil. Once that was in place, I turned my attention to something even more foundational, the emergency fund. Before I had one, my life was a fragile ecosystem where the smallest disruption could trigger disaster. A surprise bill, a car issue, a medical cost, any of these could send me spiraling. I lived in constant anticipation of the next crisis. Every unexpected sound from my car made my stomach drop. Every medical appointment felt like a gamble. Every email notification looked like it might contain bad news. But once I built even a small emergency cushion, everything changed. My shoulders relaxed in a way they never had before. The constant background hum of anxiety quieted. Problems weren't crises anymore, they were annoyances. And as my emergency fund grew, so did a feeling I had never known in my life: resilience. Only after I built resilience could I start building wealth. And building wealth wasn't about getting rich quickly, it was about consistency, patience, and humility. I wasn't smarter than the market, I wasn't special, but I could be consistent. I could show up every month, I could take the employer match, the closest thing to free money I'd ever get, and then invest a little more on top. But there was still a shadow following me: debt. Debt was more than a number. It was a psychological weight, a reminder of every impulsive decision, every moment of unconscious spending, every time I chose short term comfort over long term clarity. Paying off debt wasn't a financial task, it was emotional excavation. I chose the snowball method not because it was mathematically optimal, but because it was psychologically powerful. I needed wins. I needed to feel momentum. I needed to prove to myself that I could finish something. Every time I eliminated a small balance, it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Slowly, the weight lifted, and then came automation, not just of bills, but of everything. Savings, investments, debt payments, all of it ran automatically. My financial life no longer depended on my mood, my energy, or my circumstances. It ran on rails, like a train following a track laid months in advance. Payday stopped being an emotional event. It became routine, predictable, peaceful. And for the first time, I didn't brace for impact every month. I didn't feel the need to escape into spending. I didn't fear the unknown. I had structure. I had clarity. I had a future that wasn't built on luck or wishful thinking. I became someone I never thought I could be, someone in control. But the real transformation wasn't in my bank account. It was in my mind, in the way I saw the world, in the way I saw myself, in the way I understood what I truly wanted out of life. That new perspective changed everything. But becoming someone in control didn't happen the way people imagine. It didn't happen because the numbers finally started looking good. It didn't happen because I made more money. It didn't happen because I suddenly became disciplined or wise. It happened because I started seeing myself, really seeing myself, without judgment, without denial, without excuses. There's a moment in every transformation when you stop fighting the truth and start working with it. For me, that moment came gradually, over weeks and months of observing my own patterns like a scientist observing a strange new animal. I started noticing how stress made me spend, how boredom made me browse, how loneliness made me treat myself, how confusion made me procrastinate, how shame made me avoid looking at my finances altogether. I realized something uncomfortable. I had been using money as a coping mechanism, not for big problems, for everything. When I was tired, I spent. When I was overwhelmed, I spent. When I was discouraged, I spent. When I felt stuck, I spent. When I felt unappreciated, I spent. When I felt uncertain about my life direction, I spent. Not because I wanted things, but because spending gave me a momentary hit of control, a momentary illusion that I could change my emotional state through a purchase. But purchases don't heal anything, they just postpone the emotion and attach a price tag to it. This realization was painful, but absolutely necessary, because once I saw the truth, I could finally ask the real question: if money isn't for numbing feelings, then what is it for? That question reorganized my entire worldview. Suddenly, money wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about reward. It wasn't about identity. It wasn't about keeping up, fitting in, or proving anything. Money became about options: options to leave bad situations, options to take opportunities, options to protect the people I love, options to say no, options to say yes, options to walk away, options to walk forward. Money became the quiet architect of freedom. And once money became about freedom, everything changed. I stopped buying things to soothe emotions because emotions weren't the enemy anymore. I stopped treating myself impulsively because the future version of me deserved more than a fleeting moment of comfort. I stopped envying other people's possessions because possessions no longer symbolized success to me. Stability did, peace did, freedom did. At one point, I remember sitting alone in a cafe, watching people walk by the window, each one carrying their own invisible financial story. Some looked carefree, but I knew appearances meant nothing. Some looked stressed, anxious, hurried. Some looked polished. Some looked tired. But I realized for the first time that none of their financial lives were actually connected to me. I wasn't competing with them. I wasn't trying to match them. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. My financial life was about my choices, my peace, my progress, not about appearances or expectations. And that internal shift, that separation from comparison, was one of the most liberating feelings I've ever experienced. But the most profound change of all was this: I began to live ahead of my money instead of chasing behind it. Most people live in reaction. They react to bills, they react to emergencies, they react to impulses, they react to stress, they react to temptation. They react to life. I began living proactively, and that made all the difference. Instead of waiting for bills to appear, I prepared for them. Instead of hoping emergencies wouldn't happen, I expected them and built buffers. Instead of improvising every month, I followed a system. Instead of letting my emotions dictate spending, I let my goals guide decisions. There was a sense of power in that predictability, not a loud power, not an ego driven power, but a calm, steady, confident power. The kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself because it speaks through the absence of chaos. One evening, months into this new system, I got an unexpected medical bill in the mail, the kind that would have destroyed my month in the past. I held the envelope in my hands and felt the familiar spike of anxiety trying to return, that sharp, sinking feeling in the stomach that whispers, "Here we go again." But when I opened it and saw the number, something strange happened. I didn't panic. I didn't spiral. I didn't start calculating which expenses I had to sacrifice. Instead, I walked over to my emergency fund, made a transfer, paid the bill, and went back to making dinner. The whole thing took 5 minutes. 5 minutes, something that once would have stolen my entire week of mental health. And in that moment, I realized what I had built: a life where stress didn't control me anymore, a life where I had leverage, a life where I had options, a life where I had space to breathe. But there was another layer to this transformation that I didn't expect, a layer that went beyond finances entirely. Because when money stops being a constant source of stress, it stops being a constant source of thought. And when your mind is no longer occupied with financial fear, you begin to see aspects of your life that you ignored or suppressed for years. I started recognizing how much of my ambition had been suffocated by anxiety. I started realizing how many dreams I had abandoned, not because they were unrealistic, but because I had been too busy just trying to survive each month. I started noticing how much creativity I actually had inside me. Creativity that had been drowned out by financial noise. Suddenly, I had mental bandwidth, space to dream, space to plan, space to build, space to imagine a life bigger than the next paycheck. I used that bandwidth to explore who I really was outside of financial stress. And what I discovered surprised me. I discovered that I loved learning about things I had never had time for before: psychology, writing, investing, human behavior. I discovered that I wanted to build something meaningful in my life, something beyond work, something that reflected who I was becoming. I discovered that I enjoyed long term thinking, something impossible in survival mode. I discovered that my relationships were richer when I wasn't constantly stressed. I discovered that I was capable of far more than I thought. But the biggest discovery was this: when you stop living paycheck to paycheck emotionally, you stop living paycheck to paycheck spiritually. The panic fades, the noise quiets, the world expands, and that expansion leads to something far more valuable than money: agency. The agency to choose who you become, the agency to build your future intentionally, the agency to break family cycles of financial chaos, the agency to design a life you're proud of. It's easy to underestimate how profoundly financial stability affects your identity. When you're drowning, all you can think about is air. When you're stable, you begin thinking about direction. For me, direction became the obsession. Not wealth, not status, not perfection. Direction. Where am I heading? What do I want my life to look like in 2 years? In 5 years? In 10 years? What am I building toward? What am I becoming? These questions guided me far more than any budget or rule ever could, because budgets control behavior, but vision controls identity. And identity controls everything. As my sense of direction sharpened, so did my sense of purpose. I stopped drifting financially. I stopped drifting emotionally. I stopped drifting professionally. I stopped drifting relationally. Everything became more intentional, and with that intention came something I never expected: joy. Not the temporary dopamine of purchases, not the rush of payday, not the shallow thrill of comfort spending. A deeper joy, a grounded joy, a joy rooted in progress, in self respect, in knowing I was building something meaningful. One morning, about a year into this journey, I logged into my bank account and stared at a number that shocked me. It wasn't huge, not by society's standards, not by any stretch, but it was bigger than anything I'd ever seen attached to my name before. It represented months of automatic savings, careful decisions, intentional habits, and quiet consistency. I didn't celebrate, I didn't brag, I didn't even smile. I just sat there in silence, feeling something settle inside me, a sense of calm, a sense of arrival, a sense of being capable. And it struck me then, as clearly as sunlight through an open window, this wasn't luck, this wasn't talent, this wasn't genius, this wasn't a windfall, this wasn't a miracle, this was the accumulation of every moment I chose intention over instinct, every moment I automated instead of improvising, every moment I prioritized stability over comfort, every moment I honored future Phil over present Phil. It was built one payday at a time, one decision at a time, one shift in mindset at a time. And that's the truth I wish everyone understood. Your future isn't shaped by big moments. It's shaped by small ones repeated with consistency, especially the moment your paycheck hits, because that moment is the doorway. Most people walk through it unconsciously. I walk through it intentionally. That is the difference. And I know now, without exaggeration, that if you can master that one moment each month, if you can harness it instead of letting it hijack you, if you can structure your life so the best version of you controls the money and not the most emotional version, then everything, truly everything, can change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, not with fireworks, but steadily, quietly, permanently. Because true wealth doesn't begin in your bank account, it begins in your behavior, in your systems, in your mindset, in your emotional regulation, in your sense of direction, in your belief that the future can be better than the past. I'm Phil, and I am living proof that your entire life can transform one payday at a time if you choose to step through that moment with intention instead of instinct.